Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. I have a special guest for you today, Jeff Schreifels, who is the principal and owner of the Veritus Group, a global consulting agency specializing in major gifts and mid-level fundraising strategy. Major gifts, always one of my favorites, so we're going to have a great conversation today. He brings over 30 years in the nonprofit sector and is a pioneer in relationship-centered fundraising. And under his leadership since 2009, the Veritus Group has helped increase mid and major gift revenue and decrease donor value attrition for hundreds of nonprofits worldwide who have adopted their Veritus way of major gifts. He is an author of the award-winning Passionate Giving blog, regular contributed to Nonprofit Pro, and author of 2 best-selling books. It's not just about the money, and it's not just about the donors. Welcome, Jeff. Before we dive into things nonprofit fundraising, would you share something about yourself personally?
Sure. Well, even though I live in Philadelphia, I grew up in central Minnesota, 2 blocks from the Mississippi River. So I really understood Huckleberry Finn and the Mark Twain story. Um, I have 3 kids who are grown, 2 that are grown and 1 who's a teenager, and I just absolutely adore them. So
I love it.
yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, let's talk about fundraising. You know, there's lots of people talk about fundraising. So I want to hear specifically from you. You've been doing this a long time. When people say fundraising, when people say development, what are the key pieces that you wish people thought about first? And then maybe what is it that you think people often think about that maybe isn't the same? Or maybe it's the same as you see
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I think fundraising overall gets a bad name, especially, and I hear a lot of executive directors who look at it as almost like a necessary evil. They start this nonprofit or they're part of a nonprofit that is doing something to change the world. And then it feels like, but we got to fundraise to actually make this happen. And it's, something they have to kind of get over, in a sense. But really, the way I look at fundraising is that it's the opportunity for a donor to find joy in their giving, and by matching their passions and interests with all the good things that the nonprofit is doing to help change the world. So we know from all kinds of studies that when people give, good things happen to them. Not just in their daily life, but just like in their brains, the dopamine hit that happens for people that give. So for me, I think fundraising is like one of the greatest things that you can do, because you are bringing that donor who wants to make something really happen in the world with a need, and you get to bring it together. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah. I love that you use the word opportunity. It's a word I like to use a lot in fundraising, because so many people are like, well, I don't want to ask somebody for money or beg them for money.
Yeah.
And I say, no, you are giving them an opportunity. And I like to bring it like really to talk about transactional stuff, right? Like they could buy new shoes, right?
Yeah.
That's a popular one.
Yeah.
It's in a stereotypical way to make
Yep.
themselves happy, or they could give to your organization,
That's
right? I
right.
mean, they could. Lots of people could do both, but like giving to your organization is probably going to be an even more fulfilling experience than going out and buying a new pair of shoes. And it's probably going to bring them more meaning and more joy. So it is really a gift
It
when you
is a
give them the
gift.
opportunity.
It is a gift. Yes.
So framing it up as an opportunity even more, what do you think are, in your experience, the best approaches for nonprofits to focus on? You know, we kind of talked about major gifts,
Yeah.
but can you talk about what you think are the best ways? How should they prioritize their time and energy around fundraising? And let's see if we can center this conversation in opportunity language.
Well, I think the greatest opportunity is especially around major gifts, because this is our area, is you have the ability to build relationships with people and engage them on a deeper level. And when you do that, amazing things happen. You know, the donor gets more engaged, they start to give more, they start to see the impact that they're making. And like I said at the beginning, it's all about helping the donor create joy. And in the process, these things that you're trying to do to help make the world a better place is happening at the same time. So I just don't think there's anything better than that. So the opportunity is really around building that relationship. You know, what we do is we look at a donor and we start with data when we look at a nonprofit, and they have all these great donors. And more often than not, though, they're not treating them well. And you can see that in the data because many of them are leaving. You talked about value attrition. So a donor gives, let's say, $10,000 one year, and the next year they give 2,500. So we lost, $7,500 in 1 year of value. Why is that happening? Typically, it's because we haven't engaged them, we haven't served them well, we haven't really figured out their passions and interests, or we haven't reported back the impact of that gift. And so they either give less or they go away. And so that's a real opportunity for all nonprofits.
Yeah. What I'm kind of hearing in that, is to do major gifts well is to give your donors a better and better, more valuable opportunity, right? To
That's right.
feel even better about what they're doing with their money, to get more emotional
Yes.
value
Yeah.
from it. And you mentioned the word relationships. And I can't, sometimes people ask me, like, oh, well, how do you define a major donor? And actually, while I use the major donor language, like out and about in the world,
Yeah.
the phrase I like to use with my clients is high touch relationships.
Mhm.
And that's different from your scaled relationships.
Right.
So it's really about how many people can you have a high touch relationship with.
Yeah.
And if you have a huge network, then you're going to have to not have a high touch relationship with everybody because it's going to be too many people.
That's
And so
correct.
it is that group of people you have those high touch methods like
Yeah.
phone calls, meetings, coffees, small group things,
Yep.
dinners. And then scaled is when we bring in the digital scaled
That's right.
communication tools, right?
Yes.
Like mass email and all those kind of fancy social media stuff. How does that resonate with you?
It's spot on. So you could be a small organization, and a gift of $250 could be a major gift to you. Um, or you could be a large organization like we work with Doctors Without Borders. They have 300,000 donors. So a major donor to them is someone that can give 50,000 or more in 1 year. That's a big difference, but it's all based on how large you are and exactly like who are those donors that you can have that one-to-one relationship. And if you are large enough to have a major gift officer that is working specifically with donors, you can't have more than 150 donor relationships. And even with that, you have to tier those donors and you really have to have a plan for all of those donors so you know what you're doing. Because even 150 with one person, if you don't do that properly, set up that structure properly, they're going to get lost. They're going to be chasing things because they don't have a plan for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of like pro tip for everyone listening, that 150 number is really important. That's like the number that people who study like human relationships and culture have found is about like the maximum
Yeah.
size of kind of like one person's community or
Yeah.
community network.
Exactly
So if
right.
you're thinking fundraising, that's kind of where you start to max out. If you're thinking about scaling an organization, like you could think about scaling up to 150 employees, and then you have to kind of divide and conquer
Yeah.
to go beyond that. Or if you're thinking about how many people you can serve, whether you're running a school or running, community service organizations or humanitarian organizations, you kind of need to think about, what happens up until you reach that 150 number. And then when you start to go beyond it, that's
That's right.
where you have to change. Somebody once asked me, like, do you do things differently, Sarah, with a really small organization versus a really large one?
Yeah, I
And I'm
mean,
like, not really. I mean, I work with systems and people and leadership, and people are people are people, right?
yeah,
And after you kind of start to hit that 150 number, or when you're working more intensely with people, it gets a little bit smaller.
that's right.
You divide, conquer, rinse, and repeat, but it's the same thing
Yeah,
again and again. So it's
yeah.
just a really key. Clearly, you are honed in to to that world.
Yeah.
What do you see? So I want to touch on. So to me, like major gifts or this high touch relationship giving is like 9 times out of 10 or 9.5 times out of 10 where nonprofits should be focusing first, because I see it having a huge return on investment, both initially, like the initial work isn't necessarily high tech. You can start getting returns
Mhm.
somewhat, like big returns somewhat quickly for your effort. But then it's also kind of has this scalable thing, which I think a lot of people don't talk about, where like the more people of means that you have giving, the more access you have to more people and they start referring.
That's right.
So to me, like it's the best. But tell me, like, why is major gifts the best to you, and where should people be putting that into their kind of portfolio of
Yeah.
activities?
Well, I think it's the best, as you said. Will, once you have it really going, that program, it should garner the most net revenue for your program. The ROI is great for major gifts. We've seen in our clients, maybe when they start out, maybe the ROI is $4 to every $1 you spend, but over time, it's 12, 20, 25. We've even seen ROIs of 30 to 1. So for every dollar you're spending to cultivate that donor, $30 are coming in. That's significant, and that goes directly to your programs. So that's why it's so important. And then, as you grow, that revenue can also be used to help at the beginning of that pipeline. We at Veritus talk a lot about the major gift pipeline from acquisition all the way to then make that a state gift. And if your major gift program is really working well and it's garnering a lot of net revenue, that means you will have some money to reinvest in that pipeline and start casting the net out a little wider to bring in smaller dollar donors who eventually will become mid and major gift donors.
Yeah. So what are the things, okay, and you can do it by pipeline stage or however you want. What are the kind of, to get tactical, right? The actual things that you see working well today, or maybe the things that are, kind of coming back around or on the cutting edge for how to build these relationships?
Well, I think if we think about the pipeline, so from acquisition, we are seeing some great success in direct mail and in online digital of acquiring donors. You're kind of putting out there to them, hey, this is what we're about. and you're casting that out to a wide net. And some of those people, small amount, will start to say yes to that. And then it's really about, once they say yes, having a program that's, developing that relationship with them digitally, because you have to do it cost effectively. You can't create relationships with all of those donors, right? Not at first. And that's why you cultivate them through other means that are more effective, cost effective. And as they start to give, then we find that having a mid-level program, and for a lot of our clients, that could be anywhere from 500 to 9,099, or mostly it's around 1,000 to 9,999 cumulative in 1 year. That's usually a typical mid-level. So having that mid-level program starts to introduce the donor to a new type of relationship. Before, you're sending mail and emails and those kind of social media, and then now you're calling them. You're starting to reach out to them and finding out, what is it about our mission that you like? So you're introducing them to someone, an actual person who's saying, "Hey, I noticed that you're starting to give more and you've been really engaged. What's happening?" And then that program is hopefully trying to move them into the major gift side. And that's where you're really having those one-on-one conversations. And the objective really is to figure out, what are those donors' passions and interests as it relates to all the different things we do, right, that change the world, and matching that up. And that's the goal of a major gift officer. And so, kind of making sure that you're looking at that full pipeline and investing properly in those areas, because if you have one area too heavily invested, it doesn't make the other area efficient. So, for example, we've run into a lot of clients that are big clients who over the years have created a donor file because they're really good at direct response fundraising, but they've neglected the mid and major gifts. So donors are giving, loyally, and they are giving pretty nice size gifts, but no one's reached out to them. And so, they come to us and say, "How do we build a mid or major gift program so that we can start to build the relationship?" And when you see that, you see all these donors go, "Wow, finally, someone's calling me. I've been a donor for 20 years and no one's ever contacted me before." And you start to see gifts who are giving 5,000, give 20,000 and 50,000, just because you're simply reaching out to them and finding out who they are. It's amazing.
And I love that. So I want everybody to really listen carefully. Like Jeff is saying, you reach out to them and ask them questions about them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I hear so many people starting from like, oh, how do we write a pitch? Like, let's put this letter together. And like, from my kind of leadership coaching perspective, I'm like, I don't even want you to have the pitch.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you to risk
No.
sending that pitch to anybody.
No.
I want you to learn how to ask questions.
Exactly.
Instead of helping you write a pitch, let me give you a list of interview questions.
Exactly.
To ask
Yes.
people
Be
about
curious
them.
about the donor.
Yeah. There's a very famous for-profit business coach named Jay Abraham. Have you ever heard of him?
I haven't.
No. Anyway, he does not make it into nonprofit circles, but there are a few things I really like about his work relevant to nonprofits.
Yeah.
And one is, if you listen to him, you'll notice he tells the same stories again and again. And one is this story about how he became like labeled as the most interesting person that this person had ever met. And the very short version of the story is he was at an airport, had a layover, sat down at a bar with somebody, asked them questions for an hour. And at the end of that conversation where he just asked them questions, interesting questions, they said he was the most interesting person they had ever talked to. Right? So that is the very short version to tell the power of when you ask people questions, not only do you get to learn about them, but they often like you.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
that's like relationship magic.
Yes.
It's cool. And it's not so hard or uncomfortable to ask people questions.
Exactly.
So I really love those examples. What advice would you have for people who are kind of in this boat, we've had a lot of turmoil around federal grants, especially, and grants. And from where I'm sitting as an advocate of major gifts, and often I'm in the perspective of like, here, let me help you kind of set up your development for the first time and then pass you off to somebody like you. My clients aren't in this position because we were already, I was like, let's build, I like to say it like, the foundation of your revenue should be in individual giving, primarily like kind of your high touch relationships. And then the next layer are your scaled relationships, still individual giving. And maybe we're going to add a layer of corporate sponsorships after a while. And then that icing on the cake is grants. Like, I just don't really ever want organizations to be dependent on any kind of grant as their primary revenue source. So we kind of made that shift early. But what do you have to say for folks who are in that position? Like, their major source of revenue, like how quickly was grants, and let's say federal grants, how quickly can they shift? How can they take advantage of maybe some opportunities that are emerging to get refocused on
Well,
major gifts? And does that mean letting go of one and shifting to another? You think they can do both?
I think they can do both. I think all nonprofits need to look at all their revenue sources. And if they're too heavy on one singular source of revenue, they are setting themselves up for potential hurt. And if you are an organization that really relied so heavily on government grants or foundation grants, that can, they're hurting. And so our advice is, let's look at your database. Do you have individuals on that database? What have you been doing to reach out to those donors? Because they can be that source. Now, they might not be able to immediately replace that revenue you may lose, but that can be the start of something, so that 2, 3 years from now, that revenue can be flowing in from individuals who love your mission. And so we advise all of our clients really looking again at that pipeline. Where are you investing in those areas, and where's that revenue all coming from? And if one is too heavy, you need to start opening it up to other areas.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also I see, I had a client who runs a small organization come to me and say like, oh, well, we want to diversify and like add grants. And I'm like, wait a second, like they actually have programmatic income. So they have clients. I'm like, and they have small clients and big clients. I was like, you only have 2 big clients, right? So like diversification can be in your portfolio even of donors, right? So I see like, if you only have a small handful of major donors, it's not time to diversify by like switching activity. It's time to diversify by having a whole basket full of major donors.
Yes.
So how big should people imagine their major gifts and mid-level donor baskets? Like how far can people go with this?
I mean, there is really no limit. There really isn't, because as you deepen relationships with donors over time, and if you're really doing a good job of caring for these donors, reporting back on the impact that they're giving, really understanding who they are, they will deepen their commitment to you. It happens over and over again. We know this because we have been working with major donor programs for over 2 decades, and we see how these programs grow. American Cancer Society, they're a big organization, but they were very small with major gifts compared to their overall revenue. They were in one of those groups that really started doing, they do the events and they do a lot of direct response. That's how they grew up as an organization. But when they started, they were only like 20 million in major gifts. Now for them, they're a $500 million organization. So for 20 million for major gifts, that's really small. But they needed to make that commitment, and they did. And in just 3 years, just because they started talking to donors and building that relationship, they went from 20 to 75 million in 3 years, and now they're over 100 million in major gifts in 5 years. So it's like it's just going to keep growing, right? Because they finally decided to commit to doing it. And I think that's the case for any organization, no matter how big they are. I don't care if you have 5 major donors. Take care of them well, present them with great opportunities, report back on the impact, include them in your mission, and over time, you will see that revenue grow. And more donors will get on board with it because they'll see the difference that it's making in their lives. So
Yeah, I love that. And to add as a word of encouragement for folks out there, I have a client I'm working with. So I basically believe that investing in major gifts and individual giving is such an easy sell.
yeah,
Because, I don't believe donors should be allowed to restrict their gifts. But if I was told I had to restrict a gift of mine, I'd say you give it only to your individual development department.
yeah,
Because that's the place where, as you said, right, that, 4x return on investment, essentially, right? So like,
yeah,
so I can say to somebody, well, you could give me $100,000 for a program and it'll do $100,000 of good. Or you can give me $100,000, which I'm going to spend on growing my individual giving function.
yes,
And it's going to turn into $400,000.
yes,
We'll invest maybe $250, $300
yeah,
into the program, and then we'll put the rest back into growing our major gifts and our individual giving even more. So which
yeah,
do you want? Do you want your $100,000 to do $100,000 of good, or do you want it to do $300,000+ worth
yes,
of good? And they're going to say, I want the 300,000+ every time. So I have a client who we're starting their development office. They're stuck in grants and government funding.
yeah,
And we just pitched it to one of their funders, one of their private foundations who was
mhm,
already funding a program.
mhm,
And they were like, of course we want to fund your development office, because we understand that that is the only way we won't be on the hook for funding your program forever. And so many foundations, even if they're not saying that they'll give like general operating or whatever, they
mhm,
are worried that you are dependent on their money for their programs. I haven't met a
yeah,
foundation, I'm sure they're out there,
yeah,
who isn't worried
yeah,
about people being dependent on their funding.
yeah,
And I bet in these days people are open to that pitch.
definitely. So you're talking about what we call capacity building grants or capacity building gifts. And we often present a plan to a donor for over the next 5 years. If you invest this, this is going to be the return. And they're blown away by that. You're right. They could give 100,000 now for the program. That's a great gift. But if you gave 100,000 to develop the fundraising program, that's the engine that's going to develop more relationships, and in 5 years, that's going to churn into 800,000, that's like a no-brainer for many people,
That's right.
right?
That's right. And it's just an explanation away, because the data is there already of the impact.
That's right.
And I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, people don't want to give like that. People just don't understand the dynamic. And I haven't met somebody who didn't understand it, who I wasn't able to explain it to in like 2 to 3 minutes. Of course, for your program, you can expand it out and add all the juicy details about what it's going to look like and smell like and feel like,
Yeah.
to make it all that more juicy.
I mean, we also know it's human nature. So even if you just send out an appeal for a matching grant or matching gifts, your dollar will give us $2 back. We know when you do that, donors give on average 30% more. So it's just natural for people to want a deal, right?
They want a deal, which I think brings us a little bit back to this win-win that is individual giving. I mean, like you started with, you are giving folks an opportunity for something really meaningful.
That's right.
And an even better opportunity is for them to have twice as much meaning from their gift, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think that's really great. Well, before we wrap up, if folks are excited and thinking, yeah, I want that, what kind of folks should be reaching out to you and your group, and what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, the best way is just go to our website at veritusgroup.com, Veritus group, because we have a ton of free resources there. We have over 20 white papers, our blog, our podcast, different things all around helping fundraisers do their job better. So we have all kinds of white papers, how to start a mid-level program, how to start a major gift program if you're a small organization. These are all step-by-step guides that we have. We also have a whole training program, Veritus Group Academy. We have a certification course. So we have online courses for people who want to really get in and learn how to do this. And then for larger clients, we have our consulting where we work with them every week. So we sit down with a major gift officer and we work with them to ensure that they actually make their revenue goals, that they know how to speak to their donors correctly, that they're successful. We come alongside of them because we want them to be successful. And so there's a number of ways that we can engage with you, whether you're small or just starting out, you're a one-person shop to a large organization. We have kind of a little bit of everything for anyone.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing all of your experience and making it so accessible. And thank you out there for listening and all that you do to make our communities better. We thank you so much. One thing you can do to help our larger community of the helpers of the world is to share this or another episode with a colleague and or subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, because it helps people get access to this information. Until next time, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.